Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely flip how you think about personal finance. We usually treat money like a hard science, right? Like it's all math, perfect formulas, and precise data. But we're going to dive into a revolutionary idea from Morgan Housel's work. Your financial success actually has way less to do with how smart or educated you are, and a whole lot more to do with your actual behavior. Picture two totally different guys. First up, Ronald Reed. Just a humble janitor from rural Vermont, first in his family to even finish high school. On the flip side, we have a highly trained, massively successful Wall Street veteran, the kind of guy celebrated in business magazines and praised for his financial genius. So here's the crazy question. How on earth could this humble janitor build an $8 million fortune and completely eclipse the Wall Street exec?
Well, the stark contrast here isn't about brain power. It's entirely about daily habits. Reed lived an incredibly simple life. He spent his days quietly fixing cars and sweeping floors, carefully saving whatever little he could. He parked it in steady blue-chip stocks and just waited for decades. That immense patience eventually compounded into an $8 million fortune, most of which he generously left to his local hospital and library. Amazing, right? Then there's Richard Fuscone, Harvard MBA, top-tier Merrill Lynch executive. But Fuscone let greed take the wheel. He borrowed a mountain of cash to expand this massive 18,000-square-foot mansion with 11 bathrooms and 2 pools, just living way past any reasonable limit. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, that huge housing debt swallowed him whole, driving him straight into bankruptcy and foreclosure.
Which brings us to this massive realization. Doing well with money is simply not a hard math-based science. I mean, think about it. In what other field could a rural janitor with zero professional training completely crush a Harvard-educated executive? You would absolutely never see an untrained person walk into an operating room and perform a heart transplant better than a top cardiovascular surgeon. No way, that's absurd. But in finance, this exact scenario actually happens. Building wealth is fundamentally a behavioral soft skill. Knowing exactly what to do on paper tells you absolutely zero about what happens in your head when you actually try to pull it off in the real world. Section 1. No one's crazy.
Look, we all do stuff with our finances that seems a bit irrational from time to time. We constantly judge other people's choices and wonder, why don't they just act logically? But the fundamental truth is, we are all just anchoring our decisions to the tiny, tiny sliver of the world we've personally experienced. You and I go through life forming totally different beliefs, setting different goals, and making different forecasts. And it's not because one of us is inherently smarter, it's just because our worldviews were forged in completely different economic circumstances.
For instance, if you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 went up almost tenfold during your teens and 20s, your highly impressionable years. So you probably grew up viewing the stock market as this undeniable wealth-generating machine. But if you were born in 1950, the market literally went nowhere during those exact same formative years. These two groups of people are separated purely by the random chance of their birth year, yet they're going to walk through the rest of their lives with completely different, largely unshakable views on investing.
We see this exact same generational bias when we look at inflation. If you were a child in the 1960s, you lived through massive price spikes, grueling gas lines, and sheer economic panic in your early adulthood. You vividly remember your paychecks stretching noticeably less far every single month. Meanwhile, someone born in 1990 has lived basically their whole adult life with inflation so historically low that it barely even crossed their mind until very recently. You just can't expect these two people to look at the same financial information and react the exact same way.
This deeply empathetic framing really helps explain behaviors that might otherwise seem completely nuts to outsiders, like why the poorest households consistently buy the most lottery tickets. In the US, the lowest income households spend roughly $412 a year on lotto tickets. Now, if you're financially secure, blowing that kind of money seems entirely crazy. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can't afford basic vacations, and you feel like higher wages are a total pipe dream, a lottery ticket represents the only time you get to hold a tangible piece of the dream that wealthy people just take for granted. What looks crazy to a wealthy person is a calculated purchase of a dream for someone who feels they have literally no other way up. Nobody is crazy. We're all just plugging information into our own unique mental models of the world.
Section 2. Luck and risk.
Okay, consider the rapidly shrinking math behind Bill Gates' incredible luck. Back in 1968, the whole concept of computer time sharing was barely invented. But thanks to a forward-thinking teacher, the Lakeside School in Seattle used rummage sale money to lease this incredibly advanced computer. Just let these numbers sink in for a sec. Out of 303 million high schoolers globally, 18 million were in the US, 270,000 in Washington state, 100,000 in Seattle, and only about 300 kids went to Lakeside. What this astounding math tells us is that Gates had a literal 1 in a million head start. Now, yes, he is staggeringly smart, ruthlessly ambitious, and works incredibly hard. But by his own candid admission, if there had been no Lakeside School, there would be no Microsoft. As an impressionable 8th grader, he had unprecedented access to computing tech that even most top-tier graduate schools didn't have. But flip the coin, and you see his equally brilliant best friend, Kent Evans. Kent was just as smart as Gates, totally shared his intense business mind, and the two of them were always scheming about becoming successful CEOs together. He easily could have been a founding partner of Microsoft. But Kent experienced a devastating, unthinkable 1 in a million risk when he tragically died in a mountaineering accident before graduation. Same force, same magnitude, working in completely opposite directions. Luck and risk are absolute doppelgangers. And it's fascinating how quickly we judge these contrasting outcomes. Take Cornelius Vanderbilt, who built his massive railroad empire by flagrantly breaking the law all the time. We praise outlaws like Vanderbilt for completely ignoring the rules simply because he succeeded. We call him a scrappy, bold visionary. But we totally ignore how easily that exact same risk could have made him a failed criminal whose entire empire collapsed under court order. The line between inspiringly bold and foolishly reckless is invisibly thin. We've got to always remember this brilliant observation from Bill Gates himself. When you're judging financial success, whether it's yours or someone else's, it is never quite as good or as bad as it initially seems. We all inherently crave these clean, easily digestible stories, where success is just hard work and failure is strictly bad choices. But the real world is infinitely messier. The silent forces of luck and risk are always operating in the background of every outcome. Section 3. The concept of enough. This brings us to the wild story of Rajat Gupta. Born an orphan in Kolkata, he relentlessly hustles his way up to become the highly respected CEO of McKinsey and even sits on the board of Goldman Sachs. By 2008, he is worth a staggering $100 million. That is a massive amount of wealth that comfortably generates millions in passive interest alone. He could have done literally anything with this life. But Gupta didn't want to just be a centimillionaire. He was intensely jealous of the true billionaires circling him. He just wanted more. And that blind, insatiable desire pushed him to commit insider trading, ultimately throwing his pristine reputation away and landing him in federal prison. Now compare Gupta's tragic, self-destructive greed with the celebrated author Joseph Heller. Heller was at a lavish party hosted by a billionaire hedge fund manager, and a friend pointed out that their ultra-wealthy host made more money in a single day than Heller had earned from his wildly popular novel over its entire history. Heller's response was incredibly simple but profoundly deep. He noted that he possessed the ultimate financial asset. He had enough. Seriously, there is truly no greater danger to your personal wealth than continually, mindlessly moving the goalpost. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, vital thought. If lasting wealth is really largely a matter of your own behavior, deep self-awareness, and rigorously managing your expectations, how much of your own financial life is secretly being driven by unseen biases? Have you genuinely stopped to consider the invisible luck in your biggest successes, or the random risk in your failures? And most importantly, in a noisy world that constantly screams at us to endlessly want more, do you know exactly where your own limit lies? Figure out what enough means to you, and you might just unlock the greatest financial advantage of all.